so many of us are here. It shows how much interest there is on the role of China. I want to make a few points. We don't have much time. Firstly, there are many myths about China. I want to apologize to our Chinese colleagues here. I don't believe many of these stories about China, the greatest economy in the world, the richest economy in the world, the biggest emitter in the world. I wish it was true, because then we can really focus on China to the exclusion of almost every other country. I'm jealous that so much attention is paid on China when there are so many other countries, many of them are richer. It's very impressive what China has achieved in the last 20 to 40 years, but it is still achieving. It is only number 100 on the per capita income list of the world. It is a median country. GNP per capita is about 3,500. It's very nice compared to 300 or 500 some time ago, but it's still not very impressive compared to 15, 20,000 that some other developing countries have achieved, or 30, 40,000 of the United States or Europe. In relation to per capita emissions, it's number 75, if I'm not mistaken, on the list, the last time I checked, of the world. But yes, because of the large population, it is the major emitter now. You have overtaken below many other countries. I'm not asking you to please catch up on this one. It is very good if you can reduce further. In terms of historical contribution, China is responsible for 9% of the total stock of CO2 up to the year 2006. On a per capita basis, cumulative contribution to stock is 76 ton per person. By comparison, the USA is 1,100 ton per person. So it's far below the United States. I obtained all these figures from a table or paper compiled by Chinese scientists and NGOs, and they released it in Tianjin. It is 3 times more than what the United States pledged in terms of tons of CO2 avoided. I'm not very sure of this figure, and I'm sure there are many studies out there, but this is also what I've heard from a number of scientists. Now, what about China's targets? I think we all know the 3 targets: CO2 intensity of GNP going to fall by 40 to 45% by 2020, energy efficiency 20% up to the end of this year, and another 15% of total energy by the year 2020. Now these are rather impressive targets, and what is also impressive, of course, is that we know there is huge institutional backing to make these targets happen. The institutional arrangements in China is what is very impressive. The fact that the main climate action in China has been put not under so much the Ministry of Environment, which is a very important ministry, but the NDRC, which is overall in charge of China's economic and social development. Some people call it a mini cabinet. It's the most powerful development and economic agency in the country. And I think that this is something that many of our countries need to do, that the main development agency becomes in charge of climate change and therefore has the capacity to mainstream climate-related activities into all the different ministries and all the different sectors. It is also very important, given a very big country that China is, that the central government must be able to have influence over the provincial governments, which, as we know, and the municipal governments that, as we know, are also very important. And I think that this is being done also in China. Now, we have also many studies done, including by our colleagues from the United States, NGOs, and is this all very good? Yes and no. Yes, it's a very good start. I don't think we could have expected something much more from a developing country like China. Many other developing countries are at the starting stage. We have not even reached the stage of maturity that China has done in terms of climate action. And many countries are interested to see how China is doing it and how successful it is. If you look at the annual reports, the performance has been relatively good. The problems are many, so I think China has been struggling, especially this year, to meet the energy efficiency targets. I was in China when I read the stories of how some of the provinces that did not reach the targets had their electricity more or less shut down. So that's good. You might say it's also bad because this kind of authoritarian behavior is not something we sometimes appreciate very much, but on the other hand, it implements a policy. But is it enough what China is doing? I'm sure all of us agree it's a very good start, but it's still not enough. I'm sure our colleagues on this table here themselves will admit it is not good enough. If it is good enough, we can all go home and sleep very early and just ask all the people to go to China and study what it's doing, and that's enough. We don't need the UNFCCC. But we know it's not enough. It's not enough because it is a very big challenge we are facing, not only China, especially all the other developing countries. We are being asked to do the impossible. Continue with economic growth. Of course, we want economic growth to be the sustainable type, and we need to change the nature and the content of economic growth. We need to grow more houses and more food and less Disneyland parks and less tall buildings that are mainly empty. That style of growth has to change, but we still need to grow, especially the poorer countries. And at the same time, we have to cut the emissions eventually. First, we have to bend the emission growth curve to reduce the growth of emissions, but eventually we have to cut the emissions. And it's a very, very difficult task. Those of us who have had a glimpse of what China is doing, we are impressed, but we are also frightened. Is it something that other countries can do? Is it something that China can continue to do, and in fact to deepen what they are doing, and at the same time be able to maintain economic and social development? I don't know the answer. I don't know whether our Chinese colleagues also know the answer. They have a very big population. You know how difficult it is to control 20,000 people coming to this UNFCCC. If you're a mayor of a town of 600,000, it's very difficult to manage. If you have a country of I don't know how many billion it is today, 3 billion or 4 billion, it's very, very hard to manage. And if you want to manage growth with people coming into the employment market every year, with turbulent economic conditions around the world, and to also cut the emissions, it's very difficult. Now, the difficulty I have seen includes the cost. And if you read this excellent report that is on the table outside by the UNDP, it's excellent because of its comprehensiveness. It is also excellent because it is mainly produced by Chinese scholars themselves. If you turn to page 63 of this report, I found this very interesting figure, that if China is to reduce the growth of its emissions between 2020 and 2050. 2020, the emission is estimated at 5.6 tons per person, and the first scenario is that by 2050, this becomes 6.3 tons. It has increased, but only slightly. The cost would be $269 billion by the year 2050 in terms of the incremental costs. But if we want to reduce, if we want to go to a more optimistic scenario and reduce the tonnage from 5.6 a person in 2020 to 3.7 tons a person by 2020, which I'm sure all of us hope that China can achieve, an absolute reduction in per capita terms of their CO2 greenhouse gas emissions, in fact, then the cost will be going up to $1,584 billion by the year 2050. That is equivalent to 6% 40% of the GNP. Now, I'm not sure all the various assumptions and so on. As scientists, many of you will want to look into the assumptions. But for the first time, we have actually concrete data. We would, I'm sure, like to look at the background documents that have gone into this and so on. But these amounts are very massive. It entails a lot of money. For example, if China is going to give up coal and oil and switch to solar and wind, which are much more expensive per unit of energy to produce, what is the opportunity cost? And are we going to be able to meet this opportunity cost? Or is China going to continue with coal and oil and exhaust all the coal and oil that it has and to import more? In which case then we may not be able to meet the 2-degree target in the world. So we may be requesting China, please use less coal and oil. But can China afford it? These are some of the very hard questions. Finally, what are the lessons we can learn? I think what China is showing is something that other developing countries will have to face as major challenges. If I am a poor LDC, I will be having many more problems. I will have to reach first the stage of China and then face the challenges after that. It's going to be a very, very difficult transition for developing countries. Secondly, the developing countries will not be able to perform this miracle that they have to perform of continuing with growth, but also reducing or bending their emissions curve and reducing it, unless there is a massive transfer of finance and technology, and the capacity to convert finance and technology into development that is sustainable. This will be the greatest challenge that humanity has ever faced. So for the UNFCCC negotiations here, I think we need to have continued leadership of the developed countries in showing the way of how they can reduce their own emissions into a low carbon path. This is something we are all looking forward to learning from, and therefore the second commitment period of Kyoto Protocol is important for that. We need a comparable effort also for non-KP members of Annex 1, and we need a concrete program to enhance the mitigation actions of developing countries that are fully backed by the adequate finance and technology that has to be there to support their actions. And not only finance and technology, but capacity building. We have seen how China has built its capacity, but other developing countries have to build their capacity the way China has and to do even better than China, if possible. So all these things are questions that are going to affect not only China, but the rest of humanity. And I'm very happy that we are here to discuss this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We could do with maybe medium-sized enterprises or medium-sized power plant. I think the notion is to substitute obsolete or high emission power plants with more advanced technology used big power plants. The concept is just to raise the efficiency, and I think that program would also cover any enterprises ranging from the small to the big ones. It's well covered, and particularly for the existing medium power plant, we would try to use the technology innovation and to try to introduce more advanced technologies.
Now I open the floor to the questions. Since we have only very limited time, one person for only one question. And before you present the question, let us know your name and organization.
Opinion was that if China were to adopt the fee and dividend system unilaterally, then China could also have border taxes to push other nations to accept this away from the cap and trade, which will be disappearing anyway if Kyoto is disappearing. Now, I started this question by saying
It's important to remember, I mean, these are extremely difficult things that the world community is trying to solve. And I think, you know, as a member of the United Nations, we see sometimes there are frustrations with the processes that have been established, but what's the alternative?
We think the Kyoto Protocol is a very important step by the international community to implement the convention towards achieving the ultimate objective of the convention, that is to stabilize the concentrations of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere that would prevent dangerous interfere with the climate system, which the human race dependent on. Save the world unless you first save yourself. And I think climate change is a challenge confronted by the human race, and I think we need efforts and actions from everyone on the earth. And I think, of course, on the other issues, maybe I will leave that to the commentators. Maybe Martin would say something about the trade issue. Basically, I think there's trend today that
debate has been going on for some time, and I am more inclined to a tax system. In other words, you tax companies or individuals, or you impose a tax based on how much carbon or emissions there is, and put it into a fund, and then that fund can be financing clean technology and so on. That is more stable than a cap and trade system. As you pointed out, we are not even sure whether, you know, how far that is going to expand. On your suggestion that China could impose border tax measures, I think this is not a very good route, because it will really damage the trading system. We don't want the trading system to get mixed up with climate politics, and therefore the developing countries are very worried about proposals that are coming up in some developed countries to tax imports as they are coming in based on how much emissions are supposed to be produced when those products were produced. This will lead to a lot of disruption of the climate regime, because it will violate the principle of common and differentiated responsibility, but it will also damage the world trading system. The other challenge is subsidies, because as many of you would have read, there's a challenge coming from some quarters in the United States against China for China allegedly, illegally, according to them, subsidizing their own local industries by providing land more cheaply than normal, or providing loans more cheaply than normal to local companies or even foreign companies that are producing wind or solar energy. I think this is, again, a very dangerous and unhelpful move, because we should all be taking all kinds of measures and incentives to promote renewable energy and the production of renewable energy in our countries, which is already a very difficult thing to do, because they are much more expensive than coal, oil, and so on. If we are going to punish a country for the government encouraging and subsidizing their own local companies to move to renewables, then it is very ironic that on one hand we are putting pressure on countries like China, you have to go renewable, and on the other hand, when they do it, we say this is against the rules of the trading system. If indeed it is against the rules of the trading system, we should review those rules in favor of climate-friendly actions. Thank you.
In climate change, so what's the significance of these actions for the other developing countries? Thank you.
It subject those actions to a very sophisticated system of assessment, verification, and performance to promote the transparency of
analogy.
Okay.
So can we do that?
Yeah, sure.
Should I call you Madam
You can just call me Madame Desavian.
And we have heard recently some key countries have been talking about the outdatedness of the Kyoto Protocol. Can you elaborate on that, the UN's opinion about that?
Thanks very much for the question. I think that it's important to remember what the protocol is all about, and the fact that we have no other mechanism to solve some of our problems. The Kyoto Protocol is really a vital element of the global governance architecture for dealing with climate change, and our feeling is that countries really have to address this problem seriously, and the protocol is the one that is helping us to do that, and if we do, it's threatened.
During today's press conference, both you and Mr. Su Wei, China's chief negotiator on climate change, has been outlining what China has done.
Of course, when you're trying to understand something, you can make an effort. Perhaps not enough effort has been made to understand China's response to climate change. To me, there's no question that China has taken it very seriously. It is making some extraordinary efforts. There's a long way to go. Some people say that China has addressed the low-hanging fruits, and the hard part is yet to come. That's probably partly true, but I think it's vitally important to look at it in a broad perspective. And when you compare it to other countries' efforts and commitment to address some of the issues, China really stands out. Whether it's renewable energies, whether it's energy conservation and efficiency, or whether it's mainstreaming climate change into the overall development agenda.
There are already wonders recently about whether the UN is still the right mechanism to handle climate change, given the domestic efforts made by many countries, yet international negotiations have come to quite some failure to a certain extent. How do you see that issue?
I think we have to remember that we're dealing with something that is extremely, extremely difficult. People, of course, are losing patience, but we have to remember that nobody has ever been able to do this before. It's a major, major challenge for countries, particularly developing countries which have to balance growth and development with impediments to growth through climate change measures. So the first point is it's very difficult to expect that we can come to a solution overnight with totally different perspectives of developing countries and priorities from developing countries, developed countries, middle-income countries is unrealistic. If there's another mechanism out there that's better than the UN mechanism, that would be wonderful. But unfortunately, the UN is the best we have at the moment, and it's up to all member states to put their best foot forward and to try to come to an agreement to the best they can in order to help the future of our planet.
Thank you very much, Madam.